my house, much less a bobcat. But
all right. What's going on, Digital Wildcatters? We're just talking about what animals that we could take on with our bare hands. We think the threshold is kind of at a
we're gonna
at
do a
bobcat.
telethon on this. This could go on.
We're gonna have to have a whole chart of animals and a yes/no committee decision on if we could take on a
After
bobcat.
watching that one video, I think I could take a kangaroo. Just one good shot,
Just
though.
one,
I'd
yeah.
run, though.
Yeah, that's what you gotta. Just one clean shot.
One clean shot.
I think that kangaroo was so stunned in that video when that happened because he just like looks back.
I don't think there's any way you're taking the kangaroo, dude. I'm sorry, man. That's a nasty animal.
That's right.
That's a very nasty animal.
Speaking of animals, so I watched this. There's this nature documentary on Netflix, and it's narrated by Morgan Freeman. And the whole thing is talking about animals' connection to the universe. And the first episode is about energy. And it's talking about a cheetah, and it follows around a cheetah and shows how it hunts and expends energy to eat. And then it just eats to create energy and relates that back to energy in the universe. And so we can make a whole episode out of this. We can relate it
down.
back to energy and our ability to fight animals. So what
value added.
What do we got
on today's BDE? All right, number one, let's start off with oil prices because it's kind of wild. Yesterday, at some point during the day, oil was actually down for the year. We started the year off at about $75 a barrel. We flirted around lower than that yesterday. We had a rally at the end of the session. We're kicking around at about $78 now. So let's say we're up 3 or 4% for the year. We had a high of $130.50 a year. Vlad, who is our biggest fan, the police officer from Richmond, Texas, cornered me the other day and said, "What's going on with oil prices?" So, Kirk, I'm going to kick this to you first. What's going on with oil prices?
Well, I mean, I think the big news is what's going to happen with China. I mean, China could be on the verge of civil war. We know what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, so that tension's already bared out in prices, I believe. But is China on this verge of people going against the government? If they do, and that creates a lot of unrest, you could see an economy that tanks. And if the economy tanks, you could see oil prices tanking with it.
Yeah.
On the same time, if Beijing crushes this little civil unrest over COVID, I think prices are going to climb as we go into winter.
Well, you know what's interesting about that, though, is if the government does crush the rebellion, if you will, and we should probably talk about this more, people holding up white paper and all. It's pretty wild. Right. I mean, this is feeling very historic, if you will, about what's going on there. If the government does crush the rebellion, do they stick with zero COVID policy? And quite frankly, that's been the drag on oil prices.
True.
It's just, so it's got a lot of vectors that can shoot in different directions.
Yeah, I saw some guys on Twitter, everyone has their fundamentals of what should drive oil prices, but I've always believed that there's so much speculation in the market that really fundamentals, at least in the short term, don't matter. And there is no reason that oil should have gone negative 2 years ago on a physical basis. And here, if you look at where we're at now, I mean, you look at the fundamentals, it's like short in supply. You would think that oil prices would be up, and I know that we've been releasing from the SPR, but I don't think that makes that big of a difference. And so the only thing I can think of that's like really suppressing oil prices is FUD around China. No one knows what's going to happen, and it seems like there's got to be something like whatever's happening in China is just weird to me. I mean, one, it's weird because we just don't have a lot of information about what's actually happening there, but just the fact that their government continues the lockdowns for COVID. I mean, COVID hasn't been a thing over in the U.S. for quite some time now, at least to the extent where we're locking down people. It's just crazy that that's still happening over there. Like, you have to ask, like, why?
So I was in Tiananmen Square in December of 2019 when China knew about COVID, but the rest of the world didn't. And I was looking at Tiananmen going, this is crazy. If you remember the Tiananmen Square incident, many, many years prior about the civil unrest, about the, everyone remembers the guy that's standing in front of the tank
Yeah.
and the tank doesn't move.
Yeah.
But we're right there. We're right back there,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
And because of COVID, what say you? What do you think?
So yesterday I recorded a podcast with the Montrose Lane guys, Jeremy and Ryan, and I'll drop it tomorrow morning. But we just started off talking about China, just hey, what's going on, kind of as we were doing mic checks and the like. Ryan, I think it was Jeremy's take was just this isn't about COVID. This is another excuse to have an authoritarian regime and tighten its grip and all that. My 17-year-old daughter, Sarah, her take is that I found kind of interesting is China knows it caused COVID and it was probably an accident. I mean, out of the lab. Whether
Don't say that.
Did they do it intentionally?
Don't say that.
Did they do it intentionally? I'm not ready to go there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's an accident out of the lab, right? And so the zero COVID
It's not
policy
an accident.
is the way of sitting there saying, we're taking this very seriously. It wasn't us, blah, blah, blah. This is kind of the cover, if you will,
I don't
for
think
them
so.
doing
I don't
it.
think China gives a fuck.
I agree.
I don't think China cares.
I think they give more of a fuck than we give them credit for, because despite being a bad authoritarian government, they've been much more responsive to people since Tiananmen Square. They do know
Well, let's talk
there's
about
at least some element of
let's
of
talk
borrowed
about
time on it.
in a world where there is increased civil unrest over in China. Right now we see the protests on videos, but say that
The
it
white
gets,
paper,
Yeah.
just holding up white sheets.
say that
of
it does
paper.
get to a point of civil war
Mhm.
or violent conflict. What does that do for energy prices, for oil and gas prices specifically? Do they go up? Do they go down? I'd imagine they go down because I imagine demand for the country would go down, even though there's a war. I'd imagine just civilians aren't going to be using as much energy as they would. What's y'all's take on what it has on a macro level?
Well,
for
we're
energy
gonna
market?
you're gonna introduce the Twitter story at some point on the back of this, but I think a couple things. Number one is with social media, we have instant information, but we are not sure if that information is that real. I mean, we see videos leaked out of China, and now China can't suppress the news, but it could create devastating impact if people truly rise up. Now, I don't know if the temperature there is at such a level where people are willing.
Yeah, we don't know.
But what sparked this was people that have been basically welded into their household. A fire starts and they die because they can't get out. I mean, the zero COVID policy is dangerous AF. I mean,
Yeah.
and do we care here in the U.S.? Most people don't. I mean, most people care about inflation and the fact that they can't fill up their tank for less than $100.
And that Ohio State lost.
Yeah.
Thank God. That was a great game, by the way. Go Michigan.
That was a good game.
But what's interesting is if you look back and you study history of authoritarian governments and where it turns, it doesn't turn into a civil war. The turn is when the guard who has the gun facing a citizen that looks exactly like him decides not to shoot. And when that moment doesn't happen, that's when the authoritarian government knows it no longer has control and something happens. So I would actually think if we're at that moment, and it kind of, like I said earlier, it feels historic. If we're at that moment, then the revolution will be, I'm going to call it bloodless, and it'll be quick. I'm not saying they're going to convert to full-on democracy, but
Yeah.
I mean, Gorbachev decided to go with perestroika and all this sort of stuff because his people wouldn't shoot
Yeah.
the citizens. And so
Well,
that's what we got.
What's interesting about all of this is that we live in a new age, right? And you just talked about this. We have the internet. And you look, the internet itself isn't new, but social media is
Big time.
still in its infancy. And you look at Twitter, Elon Musk has gone on this whole rampage about, you can tell Elon is super passionate about the vision of Twitter and protecting free speech, and he thinks that this is a critical platform for free speech. And all these videos that we're talking about in China, where do you see them at? You see them on Twitter. And now you're starting to see all these second order effects from that. And Elon actually posted a meme the other day. It's like every time I wake up, there's some psyop going on Twitter. And
let's do this. I want to jump into this point, but one last thing on oil prices, just real quick, and then let's jump into Twitter. Is it should not be underappreciated in the market, this whole cap and sanction thing on the Russia and what it did, because I was talking to the OPEC whisperer this morning, and what she said is nobody knew what the caps were going to be. Nobody knew what the sanctions were going to be as Europe debates this. And so people bought oil. They bought their oil, so the price may have been higher than it should have been, oil price, because people were loading up. They were pre-buying for October and November. And then
who was loading up?
Refiners, etc. Just all
inventories. I looked this morning. Inventories in Europe are up over traditional.
I mean, people were stockpiling oil just because they didn't know whether they were going to be able to buy from Russia, not buy from Russia. So there was pressure on the buy side, and now that we kind of know what the sanction will look like, there's actually been some selling pressure. On that. So that's one thing, that just a little nuance that played there, but. Let's go back to
one other thing. Dan Piet, my good friend and great entrepreneur who runs Blueware, a great energy software company here in town. He does a game that we should do, and I'm going to steal it from him. We should pick what we think the oil price will be at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year. So January, we all put money down and say, what's the oil price going to end at? Once we know what the beginning will be.
Yeah.
And we all bet, because it's hilarious that we think we know what's going to happen.
I think we did that last year on BDE. We should go back and look and see what our prediction was.
We did that on BDE. Marshall Atkins over at Raymond James has a dinner at NAPE every year, January, where he does that. And you got to choose oil price, gas price, and then at the next year's dinner, you win a turkey if you were farthest away, and you win a really nice duck decoy if you were close. And I have won 3 ducks and 5 turkeys through the 20-some-odd years. Damn. But the most classic
Chuck's
moment
the bird,
of that,
man.
well, the most classic, because you got to go outside of consensus, to be able to win it. So the most classic moment of that, we're invested in this company. I'm sitting right next to the CEO. We had just had a laborious board meeting determining whether to hedge or not, and the CEO is pounding the table. We shouldn't hedge, blah, 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 blah. So I think oil prices were like at 75, and I look at his bet for next year's oil price, and it was like 50. I'm like, dude, you freaking savage. Well, I'm just guessing now.
He's hedging through the game.
Yeah. So, no, let's definitely do that. But we did that last year on BDE.
We have to go back and look and see what our predictions were. I don't remember what I said.
Because flat would have been the winning answer. 75. It's at 75 today.
We'll see. We'll see on December 31st. My wife said something. I was asking her, because I follow a few journalists that I respect, and I was asking her, because she's a big Twitter. She's on Twitter a lot, and she has a lot of fans and followers, and she interacts all the time. Her comment to me about some of these journalists was they're behind. Like, I don't read much of them because they're late to stories all the time.
Yeah.
And it's what I realized is Twitter has completely changed the game of news, and it is instantaneous now. I mean, so that is interesting.
Twitter is a stream of consciousness. That's what it is. And you can literally get on there. This whole FTX story, which is by far the biggest fraud and scandal in the world. I mean, it makes Enron look like nothing. If we relied on mainstream media, one, they've been just lobbing up softballs at SBF and FTX and haven't actually been diving into the story. But I was literally in Twitter spaces where there's like 60,000 people in these Twitter spaces, and news was breaking real time in the Twitter spaces. So it wasn't even happening through text. It's like the host, he's like, hold on. I'm getting something. He's like, let me confirm this. And like 15, 20 minutes later, would come back and be like, hey, I just confirmed that FTX had, funds over here. And that shit was breaking real time on Twitter by people like us that just record podcasts and are in the know. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, we're in a new age where information has been democratized, but the problem is it can't be democratized when big tech
Right.
controls it. And we've seen that. And that's what Elon's going off on Twitter right now, because apparently Apple is threatening to delist Twitter from the App Store. And a lot of people don't know that Apple and Google and Microsoft and Amazon, these 4 companies, control the majority of the internet. And I would even narrow it down to Apple and Google because they control the app stores. And so we saw this with the Parler app, which, the Parler app was kind of labeled as this MAGA, Donald Trump, alt-right app, but it wasn't when it started. It was just an alternative to Twitter. Like, they were just trying to create a social media platform for free speech. Like, it wasn't some extremist place. Anyways, Apple delisted it. Okay, well then your next thing is we create a web app and you just use the desktop version. And the problem is that you can make web apps that function just as smooth as native apps in iOS, but Apple won't let you download them on your phone. It has to be an App Store approved app to download it on your phone. And so they completely gatekeep there. You can't have any web apps that operate like they're native. And then the Parler's extent, it's like, okay, we'll just use desktop version. Well, they built out on AWS, and AWS pulled their hosting. And so all of a sudden, within 2 days, you just got rug pulled. You got your app delisted from the App Store. You got your hosting pulled from AWS. And how this ties all back into China and energy is that Apple is now threatening to delist Twitter. And it's like, why? Elon Musk posted the other day, like, hate speech has gone down on the platform since they took over. User engagement is up. They're getting like 2 million new users a day or something ridiculously crazy. But you look at it and it's like, where are we getting news from China? Getting it on Twitter. That's where all the videos are leaked and posted. And so you start seeing how all this stuff is potentially, China has a lot of influence on Apple, because where do they make it? Where do they make their phones?
Well, you know what Apple just did? Apple just released a new operating system on the iPhone in China that regulates AirDrop, because AirDrop was the way the Chinese people were sending information around without the government.
Oh, yeah.
Because if I can AirDrop you the video, you can AirDrop the video to somebody else.
Yeah, Apple delisted an app that was used a couple of years ago, and then, to Chuck's point, took away AirDrop function. And so, I mean, look, this isn't news. Like, this has always been a thing. Big tech has separate products for China. But now it's really interesting to see that you have Elon, who has, against the odds, taken over control of this platform, and just does not give a shit about any foreign entities or any third-party entities here in the U.S., it seems. And we're starting to learn a lot. And like, I don't think that this can be undersold on like how big of an impact it has on the freedom of information, freedom of speech, getting accurate information. It's just a really,
I think it'll be interesting to watch, because Elon Musk makes a lot of money in China from Tesla.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to manage that separately. What would be interesting is we need to bring someone on the show that's an expert in antitrust, because Rockefeller is the person on the planet because he controlled the distribution of oil.
Yep.
He figured out that if I have the distribution, everyone has to go through me. Now, the government created this whole antitrust laws because to specifically break up Rockefeller and his businesses.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see, because that's what we're seeing today. But what we're not seeing is, and I'm not pro-government by any means, because give them something they'll just screw it up. But it's interesting that our government is actually supporting big tech.
Yeah.
And they're not saying, wait a minute, you have too much power. They're saying, use that power for us.
Yes. No, that's exactly the thing, is like, I'm very libertarian, but I've also understood, like, you look at Apple and Google. I mean, it's a duopoly, and it's massively more powerful than what Rockefeller had 120 years ago, however long that was. Like, I think that this is way more powerful than what he had, because look at our table right here. One, we all have Apple products. Is that an iPad?
Yeah, two, iPad, iPhone.
Yeah.
Damn
We've got
it.
like fucking 10 Apple computers and products in here. And it is literally the gateway to the internet now. And that's not how the internet was designed. And so you look at, when Jack left Twitter, Jack always he says this now in hindsight, but he's like, Twitter shouldn't have been a company. It should have been a protocol. And I always think, he says that now, but I'm also like, you made billions of dollars off of it. So you're in a place where you can say that. But as we look at the future of the internet, and don't get me started on my whole Bitcoin spiel, but this is the thing, is that the internet has to run off of protocols and decentralized bodies, because once you have central entities, you run into this issue. But, I think that there is something serious there, where the government gets so much data and information to control from tech companies that they turn a blind eye to this stuff. And now you have Elon and Mark Andreessen and David Sachs and all of these like well-known, like I'm looking at this tweet right now from David Sachs. He just posted this 20 minutes ago. He says, as long as tech, MAGA, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon have unlimited power to engage in bundling and to act as gatekeepers of competitive products, there cannot be a healthy startup ecosystem. And Elon replied and said it's a real problem. Apple and Google effectively control access to most of the internet via their app stores.
Well, and let's take this down into energy, because we've kind of been watching Elon do all this and Twitter, and he's going to release the Twitter files, right? And everybody's watching that because they want to see suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, because that arguably impacted the election. What I want to see comes out of that is climate change, in terms of what has the government been asking Twitter to censor? What have they been asking the other tech companies to censor, and why? Because there have been a lot of people kicked off that have just said, hey, over the last 10,000 years, the temperature has been warmer 91% of the time. You can't even ask that question and kind of pre-align.
No, you can't
Twitter.
have scientific conversations. Like, we made a YouTube video back in 2021, and the name of the video was "Is oil and gas industry fighting climate change?" And it was just talking about methane reduction, monitoring, mitigation, and all of it was factual. There was no spin or opinion on it. And most of the facts came from the Environmental Defense Fund. Like, we pulled stuff from them, and we got flagged and fact-checked by YouTube for false information about climate change. And that was like, that hit me. I was like, oh shit, like there's actually a chance of being deplatformed as individuals or as companies, digital wildcatters, for having scientific conversations around energy production and how it relates to climate. And so, yeah, I know that, did y'all listen to that podcast episode of Mark Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan? Yeah. Fucking amazing podcast. Zuckerberg gets a ton of hate, but I'm actually a big Zuck fan. And you listen to like the things that he has to think through. Like, Zuckerberg's like your startup builder. Like, he just wants to build shit. And you listen to him, he's like, dude, I have to make decisions that impact countries' elections. And you hear about that and you think about Twitter. Twitter, I think, has their problem's even worse, because it is the stream of consciousness for real-time news and ideas and reports. And then you look at who is at Twitter. I mean, Elon just posted a video the other day. He's like looking through some merch closet, and it's full of t-shirts that say "Stay woke." And I mean, very heavy liberal bias in that company, and who is doing the content moderation. And Elon says he's going to release the Twitter files that show all this stuff.
So I was talking to Oilfield Rando after I listened to the Zuckerberg podcast on Rogan. And I was going, Oilfield, you're wrong about Zuckerberg. He's just a dude that wants to make software that allows people to connect. He's got 3 billion people on the platform. If he makes a mistake 0.001% of the time, that's literally millions of mistakes. It's just tough. And Oilfield Rando said, Chuck, as soon as he sends the murder bots after you, you'll be back on my side about that Zuckerberg guy. So
where Zuckerberg lost me was that he owns this giant palace in Hawaii. Nothing wrong with that. But if you read about, there was a lot of the local community they owned different pieces of land, and he forced them out of their land so we could have a continuous piece of property. And the way he did, I read a few articles on this, the way he did it was kind of like being a bully. And that's where I just lost respect for, like, if you're an entrepreneur and you're about, you know, you're believe in sort of libertarian, everyone should, you know, everyone should be able to compete fairly. He was unfair. And the way he kicked people out of their own homes that have been living there for generations, to me, just kind of was like, he's just a douchebag like everyone else.
Yeah.
He was successful, great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of one-hit wonders. He's a one-hit wonder. He did one thing well, and good for him. It doesn't mean he knows anything about anything else. And that's the problem that I have with a lot of people that say, well, I did one thing, so I'm a billionaire, so now I'm an expert on everything. It's like, no, you did one thing well.
What I like about Zuck, though, is, one, he's curious. So, you know, Zuck's the only tech executive I know. I mean, there could be more that I know that was public, that went out and visited a deepwater drill ship out in the Gulf of Mexico to see how complex the operations were for oil and gas and get an appreciation for that. You know, I think that he's done a pretty good job. You know, I think that, like, I don't use Facebook anymore, but I do think that
why not?
It's just a platform for old people.
Yeah.
Don't look at me, you fuckers.
We're all looking at. I'm not on it.
No, you look at the evolution of what happened to Facebook. I mean, Facebook, when it started, I mean, you had to, like, I couldn't get on Facebook when I first heard about it because you had to have a college ID, and I was only in high school, right? And so it was like this really curated community platform for college students, and very centered around community. You go look at old videos of Mark Zuckerberg when they were launching Facebook, and they're having, you know, college campus parties, and he's got a red cup in his hand doing a interview, and like that's how they got distribution. What it became today was like there's no value. Like Facebook doesn't add any value to my life. Twitter does. I get so much. Like I have learned so much about energy and finance and other just world events from Twitter. There's tangible value there. Instagram, there's tangible value there, which is obviously a made up product. But Facebook itself is just like, it's where you go and you're, you know, old uncles talking, you know, some racist shit, or, you know, just like, it's just not a valuable platform for most people.
Well, it's sugar pop, right? I mean, maybe Twitter's hardcore rock and roll, but, you know, Facebook's sugary pop boy band stuff. And that's how he describes it. I want you to go there, have a pleasant experience, see your friends and family, and the birthday cake they had.
Speaking of sugar pop, I was on Twitter during college football extravaganza, and someone posted that they had a Jack and Coke in their hand. And I was like, you know what? I haven't had a Coke in probably 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And I poured those two combinations together, and man, sent me back. It was good. Have you had a bourbon and Coke in a while?
You probably got a dopamine rush.
I was totally jacked. I was like, man, I'm drinking.
It's probably been 20 years and it was Diet Coke. No, Andrew just came in with, and he's right about this, Facebook's data collection and ad targeting are so accurate. It's really creepy.
But okay, so let's talk about, because everyone has a problem with how accurate their data collection is. But I'm actually on the opposite side of that. I think Instagram ads is one of the most valuable ad platforms to me as an individual, because I discover so many products that I love. That
I hate it.
I wouldn't have found regardless. And so that's like actually true value add, one from a consumer and from a advertising standpoint. And they've absolutely crushed it there. But yeah, it is scary, especially like I've ran a lot of Facebook ads, and the data that you could get just as an advertiser 5-6 years ago was kind of crazy. Like, you know, like Facebook knows when you're pregnant. If you're a female, they know when you're pregnant before you do. Like, that's how fucking wild it is.
Well,
we're kind of getting deep in the wormhole here of social media. But it is interesting how you know, just to add on to that note, a lot of people may not be aware of this, but social media and tech companies are a big driver of energy makeup in the United States. Google, Microsoft, they have these huge power purchase agreements with renewable power companies, and these mandates where they're saying, hey, we're going to 100% of our servers are going to be powered by renewable energy. And so they actually have a huge impact on
What the
energy makeup.
infrastructure
Yeah,
is
and
going to look
infrastructure.
like.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And it comes down to something we've said a million times on here. When you buy energy from authoritarian dictators, bad shit just happens. People die, people freeze, whatever the case may be. And it really deserves a very thoughtful, dare I say, adult conversation about what we should be doing transition wise. And if we're not even going to allow scientific discussion about the basic facts, we're really going to be in trouble, because this isn't like a product or something. This is energy, which is life.
I mean,
speaking of buying, what about Germany making a 15-year commitment to Qatar?
That's what I was just about to
for
to
LNG.
say. Yeah, that's
they have to.
I mean, they don't have an option. I'd love to have Toby Rice call in for this one, because I bet Toby's
going, let me build an export terminal.
Yeah,
what
let
the
us,
hell, guys?
Yeah, let us export it.
I'd be pissed. I mean, that was opportunity wasted.
Yeah.
And if you're Germany, why wouldn't you go with a regime that's, more democratic, if you will, than a regime that is a dictatorship?
Yeah. I mean,
because Joe Biden could not walk into those negotiations and say, we will be able to do this, because we don't have any export capacity right now.
Where's the supply come from? Where does the export capacity? We don't have the terminals. Like, we don't build in this country anymore, so we don't have the ability to serve and deliver. It's just really interesting when you look at history and world dynamics. You look at the Middle East and just the power density that sits there, the energy density, and just how much control they have for countries that are dictatorships and seen by the rest of the world as like not quote unquote good places. But Germany's relying on them. He went from being reliant on Russia to relying on the Middle East. I mean,
at least if you're Germany and you build the infrastructure to be able to accept the LNG, well, at least you have other supply of that. It's not like the Nord Stream pipeline that's coming straight from Russia. And
no, 100%. You have optionality, right?
That's
where you can,
better.
Yeah, for sure.
But still,
there's nothing you can do. If you're Germany, you need to get the lowest cost of energy that's reliable.
Yeah,
and it's going to be there. So, I mean, I think they put themselves in the situation because of them killing all their coal plants and decommissioning their nukes.
Max Gagliardi posted this chart yesterday. It was an interactive chart, and it showed
a great chart.
It showed, I wish we could pull it up, but it's an interactive chart. But it shows energy inflation over the last, I think, 15 years or so. And so this is pre-Ukraine, Russia, pre any of this. I mean, energy prices just skyrocketing in Europe over the last decade or so. And, it's easy to blame Russia and Ukraine for this, but this was already happening well before. And, I remember I posted this tweet as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, and I said, this is what happens when you have bad energy policy. And I had people on there like, are you insinuating that this war's fought over energy and not decades of Russian?
It's always
Russia
about
won it. I was like, I'm not saying that Russia doesn't want to unite bring back the Soviet Union. It's like, what I'm saying is that why right now? Like, there's a reason right now, and it's because everyone's weak and they can attack, and they know that they have leverage when it comes to energy supply. And so, you look at it, these are things that are built on the events of 1 to 2 decades, and Russia's just striking now because they had the opportunity to.
I posted this great article from Milton Friedman from 1970 when he writes about Economics 101, and that when companies take on sort of woke projects, that the shareholders will remove those management teams because they're spending money that could be going to dividends or back to
constructive profits somehow.
And it's true. And he names all these examples back in 1970. The big issue in 1970 was pollution, by the way. And so But what I find different today than back then is that when you think, and I'm thinking about ESG and I'm thinking about climate tech and clean tech, is that companies are not being penalized. And if we think about Europe and their bad energy policy, there's almost this fact that the markets almost move. There's a few controlling the whole in some ways. And I'm not trying to be conspiracy, but I'm like, it's interesting because a lot of companies and governments are spending really poorly on energy policy.
Well,
and they're not being held accountable.
Well, you know what it is? It's the thing I've always said about Ronald Reagan. I mean, Ronald Reagan rose to power saying government is not the solution, government is the problem.
Right.
Yet by being such a great president, he installed so much more confidence in
the
government that we wind up, borderline socialists like we are today. The energy business kind of did it to ourselves by creating all this really cheap, abundant energy for so long, over the shale revolution in particular in the United States, that it allowed all this bad energy policy, right? You could go spend billions on renewables, et cetera, because oil and gas was so cheap. Now that it's going to be expensive, I think that's where accountability comes in, because people are going to go, whoa,
Speaking of shareholders driving returns and management teams being removed, I saw this on Twitter yesterday that BlackRock was closing their ESG fund, but it looked like I couldn't find it from a legit link, so I'm not sure if it was true or not. But Bloomberg did post an article that BlackRock and UBS asked to be removed from Texas energy boycott list. So the state of Texas had made this list of companies that they were blackballing, that were boycotting the fossil fuel industry, and now you have BlackRock and UBS asking to be removed from the list.
We're really sorry.
Yeah. And,
interesting.
BlackRock and Larry Fink and all of these private equity bros up in New York City are a primary driver for divestment out of oil and gas. And
that's who I was thinking of. I didn't want to mention them by name, but I'm glad you did.
Yeah, fuck them. Whatever. Dish Wildcatters just doesn't.
Let's get Fink on the line
at all. Yeah, hey, someone, Chuck, pull up Larry Fink.
Producer, get Fink on the line.
But primary driver in the narrative that fossil fuels are bad, renewables are the future, it's green energy, it's ESG, extremely toxic narrative over the last 2 to 3 years, and there's almost no repercussions for them in that. And now you see it's so funny, man. This was just, the writing was on the wall. All these endowment funds divesting, and it's easy to divest when it's 2020 and oil and gas profits are in the shitter.
Shitty.
Like, it's easy to divest then. But now that the entire market is cycling and the returns are in energy, now everyone's like, oh, well, maybe oil and gas isn't that bad. And it's like, fuck you.
Well, what was really interesting? I did some research on this, and I'm going to be dated on this, so I'll probably get it wrong. But the early days of actually activist investing were unions that built cheap housing for people. And then you got into apartheid, et cetera. So there were actually some really good wins for quote unquote ESG investing that I think we'd all agree with that happened because of that. It's just like anything else, it's gone to the extreme.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about my little island of Nantucket. The business owners used to build housing for their employees because that was the best way to get employees to work and stay on the island, and for the workers to be able to afford to stay on the island.
I was gonna say, just
it was the cost was borne by the entrepreneur. Today, and this is Nantucket, and probably unlike many resort towns, is the entrepreneurs are no longer bearing the cost. They're pushing it on the government to provide housing, and they're pushing those costs onto others. So I think that's sort of my issue about a lot of these things when we think about like GE Super Fund when they're pouring PCBs into the Hudson River and the government came and bailed them out. I think when costs are not completely baked into a product, sometimes entrepreneurs and companies abuse and don't take advantage, or they don't acknowledge the cost. So in oil and gas case,
P&As.
That's right.
Yeah, and everyone knows that P&As get kicked down the road. That cost gets kicked down the road by CFOs. And this is my...
But that's a real cost.
Yeah, it's a real cost.
And they're ignoring it.
Yeah,
and that,
it's a real cost. And then when the wells get abandoned or they're not plugged properly, that comes back on taxpayers. And I don't want to, I didn't profit from those wells. And so, yeah, that also, if you take it over to renewable energy, this is something I've had a hard time getting through some of my friends' heads on renewables, is that everyone talks about renewables being the cheapest cost of electricity. And all they look at is at the asset level, hey, you can build a wind turbine farm or a solar array for this amount, and you can sell electrons into the market for this amount. Cool. But in reality, the way that the market is structured right now, the way that the grid is structured, is that you need backup generation or battery capacity.
That's right.
And those things don't get wrapped up into the cost of renewables. And so
same with transmission.
Yeah,
as part of that.
I've talked
you can't build a solar farm in the middle
I brought
of
this up with a
downtown
friend in
Houston.
renewables, and their response is oh, well, those are two separate things.
They're not.
The person that builds the asset doesn't care about battery storage. And I was like, but that's the problem. I said, me as a citizen of Texas, I care about having reliable and affordable electricity. So when you look at renewables, when we talk about costs, it needs to be from end to end, from building the asset to backup generation or battery storage, transmission. When you look at the cost of oil and gas, it needs to be from the moment you spud or you buy that acreage to the moment that you P&A. Yeah.
Totally agree.
And that, you have to do things by the book. And then, hey,
I hate to even open this can of worms, and we won't do it because we need to wrap up anyway, but there is a way to get there. You basically you go free market, you get rid of all the subsidies, you do put reliability constraints on sources, so you got to be able to produce for, let's say, 48 hours, 72 hours, something like that. But you do have to acknowledge that pollution, even if you only think pollution is slightly annoying, there is a cost to
but
that.
That's a cost of the environment that needs to be baked in.
That's got to be baked in.
It just needs to be baked in.
Yeah,
and
somehow. And
early 1900s, when GE was
is,
pouring PCBs in the Hudson River, do you think those scientists would feed those chemicals to their children? No.
Right. Yeah.
No.
So
yeah, that's I actually sat down with Tony Sanchez from Sanchez Oil and Gas, and he has this new company. I can't remember what it's called, but they actually have a good idea around P&A and fixing this from a capitalistic perspective, and they treat it like an insurance company where they go to an EMP and say, hey, you're going to pay us I think it's a one-time premium, and when a well or an asset gets to the end of its life cycle, you're going to sign it over to us. And essentially what they're doing is they're taking those premiums just like an insurance company does. And
That's
then
awesome.
They're going and getting a return in the market. Yeah. And then they take
Tony's
on the
smart
liability.
guy.
Yeah. They take on the liability of doing that. And so that's an interesting model. But yeah, this whole, the costs have to be end to end, because if not, it comes back on us. And what's the saying?
Or it distorts. If the
privatize the gains, socialize the losses. That's the system that America runs on right now, and it just irritates the shit out of me.
All right. We had multiple contestants this week for Finger of the Week. We have Joe Biden agreeing to allow Venezuela to produce oil, at the same time not helping Ghana out in terms of increasing their oil production. We had the New York Times I think tomorrow, is Sam Bankman-Fried still speaking at their forum? Yeah. That's a cluster.
Didn't we have him to call in one of these shows?
We need to record
him and Kanye.
We should record an entire podcast so I can break down what has happened in the FTX.
We ought to do that. Scandal. We maybe even need to deep dive on BDE like we did the election.
Yeah, special BDE episode, crypto
I love edition.
It. We had Alyssa Milano who tweeted out that she, because of all the right-wing hate and everything on Twitter, she was going to sell her Tesla.
No, can I read this tweet verbatim?
Please read it.
Okay, because I got to pull it.
I love this. Is a great shit.
So I don't know who Alyssa is. Chuck had to school me up, but I did see this.
She's
tweet.
on Facebook.
I know. Okay. It's big over on Facebook. So she sends this tweet. I gave back my Tesla. I bought the Volkswagen electric vehicle. I love it. I'm not sure how advertisers can buy space on Twitter. Publicly traded companies' products being pushed in alignment with hate and white supremacy doesn't seem to be a winning business model. Then this guy replies, Hodge twins, and says Volkswagen was literally founded by the Nazis and Hitler.
Hitler designed the VW Bug.
This comment got 200,000 likes. Like, probably one of the most vicious ratios I've ever seen on
Those
Twitter.
guys are funny, by the way.
So we normally give away the finger of the week, right? We are delegating our authority to give the finger of the week to somebody this week. So we're going to allow somebody to step in our shoes and give the finger of the week. So this is this week's finger of the week. Harold Hamm gave the finger of the week to the investing public by exiting the New York Stock Exchange on November 23rd. Continental is now a wholly owned company of the Hamm family. Therefore, congratulations, Harold, giving everybody the finger of the week.
Harold Hamm is in Oklahoma smiling right now. Congrats, Harold.
Well done.
Hopefully this makes up for the joke I told about you last summer.
All right, that wraps up today's show. Hope y'all appreciated the deep dive on social media founders and conspiracies with energy and foreign entities. I'm sure we'll be talking about that more to come in the future. If you like the show, make sure to share it with a friend and catch us next week, 10:30 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday.